Time now for our Rants and Raves, starting with you, Dan Kennedy.
I have a rave for the Correspondent, which is a Dutch news organization that is hoping to launch its English language version next year. They're looking for donations to make this happen. It's totally a membership model. There's no advertising. They call themselves Unbreaking News. And they are trying to do something that we've been trying to do for 25 years now without much success, and that is involve the audience in a serious way in helping to advance the stories that they do. I really wish them well, and I'm planning to become a member.
Great. Do you have, is there a paywall?
Well, no, there won't be a paywall, as I understand it. They're looking for essentially voluntary memberships.
Great. All right, Dan.
Well, have you noticed how there's been sort of a drop-off in the coverage of the caravan?
Yes.
Even though at the time when we heard about it, they were hundreds of miles away, and now they're right on the border, but you don't hear as much about it. Well, I have a rant for journalists, news organizations that really over-covered the story. And it's not just my observations. Take a look at some of the numbers. From the video monitoring service, Grabian, they told the Wrap that in the week leading up to the midterm elections, the word caravan was spoken on Fox more than 1,200 times, on CNN more than 800 times, and on MSNBC nearly 600 times. In the week following the midterm elections, on Fox 203 times, on CNN 75 times, and on MSNBC 110 times. Now, I get it. We cover stories that are right in front of us. If politicians are talking about it, that's what you cover. But so I'm not saying that you shouldn't cover this story, but there comes a point where you have to be responsible, especially around an election. And if you feel that you're buying into the narrative of one particular side by over-covering a story, I think that's wrong. You need to dial it back, and for that reason, it's my rant.
All right, Callie.
I've been hearing it on NPR and CBS. Just let me just say
Not
that.
everybody. Some.
Okay, yeah,
Right.
all right. So I have a rant and a rave. So the rant is for going back to that press conference with Jim Acosta and a few days around it. A particularly directed venom by President Trump against black women journalists. And April Ryan wrote a piece in the Washington Post putting it all together, talking about what, the abuse that's been heaped on her, Abby Phillips of CNN, and also Yamiche Alcindor from PBS. And that, in her words, Trump relishes and injects venom into verbal attacks against women of color. She goes on to point out that outside of the journalism world, there's some other black women that he's had a particular venom for. And, pretty much nobody's said a lot about it, except I am now in a second wave of stories where people are noticing it and talking about the harm, including Sherilyn Ifill, who is the head of the NAACP Defense Fund, and also Gwen Ifill's cousin, talking about this really goes beyond just those three black women. We have to be concerned about it. So at the heels of this, Harvard announces the first black woman that will be the editor of The Crimson, which everybody knows is a top-rate student newspaper. Her name is Christine Guillaume, and in the 146th history of Harvard, she'll be the first black woman to have that role. But eventually, and when she graduates, she'll enter into the same system with these other black women journalists. So I just want everybody to know that there's something we need to pay attention to on the rant side, but I'm raving for the fact that she has this position and that there's some progress is being made, even if it takes more than 100 years.
Right.
I'm going to do a rave that on the other side of it is also a rant. The rave is for two New York Times investigative reporters, Cheryl Finkel and Nick Confessori. They are the ones who did the piece that's been running over 2 days now about Facebook and how Mark Zuckerberg and Cheryl Sandberg essentially not only acted very slowly in responding to the Russian interference during the past election, but took active steps, including hiring a dirty tricks known public relations firm to try to basically silence and smear the opposition, the critics of Facebook here. So this was really, I think, a story that talked about a really dark underside of what Facebook has been doing, so it bears keeping an eye on. So
and
good
actually
job
putting out some disinformation while they were at it.
And they were putting out disinformation. That was part of what this public relations firm is famous for doing. So they were not only talking publicly about blocking Russian disinformation, they were actively paying to have disinformation put on the site.
So we should say that they said they didn't know about it until yesterday.
Right.
They said they didn't know they had hired them. Okay, go ahead.
I have a rave tonight. We've covered this story a number of times on Beat the Press, but to its credit, the New York Times has not let go of the story of Jamal Khashoggi, who was the Saudi journalist who was murdered in the embassy there, in the Turkish embassy. Istanbul. Yeah. And now, basically, the Saudis have admitted he was murdered. They're still saying it was, an interrogation gone wrong or something like that. But the New York Times also did a great editorial about this today, about our relationship with the Saudi Crown Prince, and he's proceeding as if he didn't know anything about this and nothing ever happened, which is just totally ridiculous because we know his henchmen were part of the team. Yeah. That team didn't just happen into the embassy. They were called there. They brought dismemberment equipment with them, and to its credit, the New York Times has not let it go. And of course, I know the Washington Post hasn't let it go either, but that's because Khashoggi also wrote for the Washington Post. So, but to its credit, I have to say I've really, really appreciated the fact that they've stayed with that.
I think that's so good because oftentimes we let go of stories. Big stories get attention, and then you forget about them. It happens with breaking news stories.
Saudi consulate,
everyone's there, and then you pull back. So I think it's always good when stories are deserving to continue to go after them.